We finally got revealed to Sukuna's furnace ability, or the divine flame, whatever you call it, in this fight. Let's quickly dissect some of the information we got on Sukuna's furnace ability. And by the way, I don't know what some of these words mean in this chapter. I'm just gonna let you know right now, I'm not gonna act like I do. Some of the translations is a bit strange, but that's probably only specifically towards me because I'm kind of, kind of Riri. But I haven't seen other people's interpretation. I'm going to try to explain what I think a lot of these things mean. So I know some people already know and have this down to a T and have all this all figured out. I'm going to try to come to my own conclusion straight off the dome, just reading this chapter. Quickly though, if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you guys take the time to leave a like and subscribe. 0% of you guys are sub that watch these videos, so if you would subscribe, it would make a grown man's day. So let's start from the very top. Ryoma Sukuna can only open the furnace doors after prepping his ingredients, cleave, and dismantle. Right before Sukuna opened the furnace last chapter, he was using his domain, which is obviously engraved with cleave and dismantle, to attack the surrounding people in the area. The moment Sukuna stopped his slashes is when he activated his furnace ability in his domain, meaning that the ingredients were ready. And like I said, that's probably because he was using his domain to slash up pretty much everybody within the area. So Sukuna using this ability is most likely tied to him having to use cleave and dismantle before he can activate it. Hence why they say after prepping his ingredients, cleave and dismantle. And this probably isn't restricted to specifically his domain slashes or his domain sure hits, since when he used open against Jogo or the flame arrow against Jogo, prior to that he only used a couple of slashes to kill the 2 females, and I think about 2 for Jogo, before he activated the black box and used the flames, meaning he doesn't need a domain to activate this. And even though it took some time in the last chapter while using his domain to slash up everybody, which now that I think about it, that domain lasted for less than 99 seconds, so it wasn't even that much time to begin with. Even with the Jogo altercation, it seems he can use it relatively quickly if he decides to, but honestly I don't think the time really matters. It's probably just limited to the amount of cleaves and dismantles he uses prior, so he can probably get this off relatively quick depending on how much he wants to spam his attacks. The next piece of information is that despite their absurd firepower, the flames within the furnace lack both speed and range. To amend for this, Sukuna created a binding vow. The drawback from this binding vow is that Sukuna can't use the flame arrow on multiple targets outside of his domain. The binding vow enables Sukuna to not only reduce all within Malevolent Shrine into dust, but ensure that all the resulting particles matted into explosive curse energy akin to furnace. Yeah, it kinda lost me at the mated in explosive curse energy akin to furnace. What the fuck do you mean akin? I know this is a word used in the manga plenty of times. Do you mean aki? Doesn't that mean friend in a language? I don't remember which one. What I got from this is that he can't target multiple people outside of his domain with the furnace now, for the sake of allowing him to engulf the entirety of Malevolent Shrine's range in the furnace that should essentially disintegrate you, and if there are any people surviving, the particles of said person, they will turn into explosive curse energy, or the particles in the furnace just in general turn into explosive curse energy. On top of this, Sukuna altered the functionality of the domain to one that only allowed entry to living beings, maintaining the shrine's output while sealing it airtight. This is pretty straightforward, so let's continue to the last section since it describes how powerful this thing really is. Thermobaric explosives. Listen, I have no idea what the fuck that word means. This is what I found on Google, and if that's the case, yeah, this guy has a literal bomb in his friggin' furnace. And the transformed particle matter danced, raining down on every inch of the domain. The heat of the furnace spread the detonations immediately. So I believe this means whatever particles remained, or whatever particles are in the furnace, since they got turned into explosive curse energy, the heat of the furnace that's engulfing the entire area causes it to detonate within the furnace, the explosive particles. Like, not only is this guy just burning you to death, this guy's making sure you explode after. Birthing, scalding, instantly compressing and decompressing shockwaves. Bro, what do you mean birthing, scalding? Like, what is that? I have no idea what they mean by this, but they're basically saying ensuring the death of all living things within the domain, and I can understand that. So to sum up what I just read from all of this, Sukuna has a furnace ability that has to be activated by a certain amount of cleave and dismantles prior. The furnace can only target one person outside of the domain now due to the binding vow that allows Sukuna to engulf everything in Malevolent Shrine's range with his flames that was said to turn them into dust. And to assure it does, the remaining particles get turned into explosive cursed energy that detonates anyway due to the furnace's heat, ensuring the death of all living things within the domain which was also said, which is why this is said to be Sukuna's ultimate move. And I think this is implying it's his strongest ability in his arsenal yet, meaning it's stronger than everything he had prior to the World Cunning Slash. And this even includes his regular domain, with the cleaves and dismantles. I personally think this is way more powerful than the slashes he uses as his sure hit, obviously from the way it was described. And just think about it, this ability was the one able to kill Choso, and maybe even the other students, even though they were just enduring Sukuna's slashes with simple domain, and those slashes were said to have the same amount of output as his regular domain slashes. So this has to be stronger, right? And it's literally called his ultimate move, so it kinda has to be. This ability cooked Jogo and Maharaga. What? Maharaga? This version he made with his binding vow is truly the strongest thing we've seen from Sukuna, besides maybe the World Cunning Slash potentially. Obviously that could still be stronger, and it probably is because it can literally bypass anything and literally kill anyone, except for maybe the Go Hakari, but that's not what we're here to talk about. So I wanted to explain all this because of what I'm going to talk about in the next section of the video. Now the question that's being thrown around is, was this what Sukuna was holding back the entire time? Because when Gojo died, he mentioned Sukuna couldn't give him his all, and he even doesn't know if he could beat him without the 10 shadows. Rame says Sukuna hasn't even gone all out yet, and going off that logic, since this was described as Sukuna's ultimate move, it's safe to assume that this is what Rame was referring to. As for Gojo, I'm not quite sure, but it could make sense that he was referring to not being able to potentially win against Sukuna without the 10 shadows, since if he didn't use the 10 shadows, he probably would have found a way to use this. But if this was the ability that Sukuna was holding back, there's going to be some problems that arise with this interpretation. People are going to ask, what about Infinity? There was also some dialogue spread on if he could use it in the fight against Gojo in this chapter. And the last thing is, I want to personally ask people, if this won't be a factor in their battle, why did Gojo question himself against a non-10 shadow Sukuna? So firstly, let's talk about what was said this chapter. What was said this chapter gives some context as to why Sukuna didn't necessarily use it against Gojo, and I quote, "On top of constantly altering the conditions of his barrier techniques, the repeated use of binding vows to alter his effective range meant that during the battle with Gojo, the furnace remained cooled, since he didn't have the freedom to unseal the flames," which is implying that Gojo was the only one stopping Sukuna from directly using this ability by making him use binding vows in order to fight against and destroy Gojo's domain. So therefore, it means Sukuna wasn't holding back because Gojo didn't give him the chance to use his furnace ability. Even though that is how you could potentially interpret this, I don't think it's that simple, honestly. There's one possible way he could have potentially used it. First, I want to mention that this ability isn't the domain's sure hit effect. Whether he can use it as a sure hit effect is a whole different topic, but from what we've seen this chapter, it isn't his sure hit effect. It was labeled as an attack, and Choso was low-key blocking it from Yuji, and he was the only one getting burned. If it was a sure hit effect, Yuji would have got burned as well. So it's safe to assume this wouldn't bypass Gojo's Infinity, but there's a possible window where he could have used it in their battle, and this was in the first domain clash. Sukuna and Gojo clash domains, and Gojo's domain gets almost instantaneously broken by Sukuna, who destroyed it from the outside, obviously because he has a barrierless domain. With Gojo's case, since he just popped the domain, his curse technique Limitless became unstable, and he wasn't able to maintain Infinity, and we know this happened to Gojo because of what Kusakabe said, and for the fact that Sukuna was attacking Gojo without even using domain amplification, since it was only emphasized that Sukuna only started to use domain amplification within the domain after Gojo learned how to replenish his burnt out curse technique at the end of the chapter. That essentially allowed him to maintain his Infinity within the domain. But in that window within the first clash between when Sukuna destroyed Gojo's domain and Gojo finally replenished his curse technique, it's possible that he could have used the flame arrow then. In that whole sequence, Gojo was constantly getting hit by Sukuna's sure hit effect, which should have enabled him to open furnace like it did last chapter, or like we just discussed in general, he needs those ingredients to prep for the open ability. Throughout the first domain clash, Sukuna spent the whole time fighting Gojo hand to hand while Gojo was spamming RCT, aka reverse curse technique, and using simple domain to counter the domain sure hit effect. Instead, he could have just opened furnace and bombed Gojo like he did to Maharaga. Against Maharaga, he used his shrine, then instantly followed up with the flame arrows and bombed and one-shot Maharaga. Of course, I'm not forgetting about the fact that it says the flames lack range and speed, but you also have to remember Gojo can't teleport in that moment since since his teleportation relies on his curse technique. It's another application of Limitless. So just saying Gojo can just teleport away, but it's also not fair to say that this will instantly tap Gojo. But that's why I'm probably going to specifically refer to the one he created this chapter. This will touch Gojo because it engulfs the entirety of the effective range of Malevolent Shrine. Because regardless, nothing is stopping Sukuna from making a binding vow like he did this chapter in order to make it this deadly. This is the same guy who made a binding vow to remove the chance required to do the word cutting slash dismantle so that he could straight up one-shot Gojo in that moment. This is the same guy that made a binding vow to somehow replicate his domain while not being at full strength to open it. So honestly, the question is really whether it would kill Gojo in that moment. I can't prove RCT can't heal this, but the way it's described, it's saying turning everything in range into dust and has kind of like this failsafe to turn particles, mated particles, into explosive curse energy that explodes and detonates. It feels like it's a sure kill, especially the way it turned Choso's body into ash and I completely disintegrated it. But for the fact that it didn't last for too long in this chapter, it's possible Gojo can heal throughout the duration. But then again, it's more powerful than his slashes, and that turned Gojo completely black at moments. I mean, at some point, like, you can't heal from everything, am I right? Like, if that's turning you completely black, Gojo, what the hell is this doing to you? I know some people out there are gonna say this doesn't make sense that Sukuna could just do this, because if he could use it, why didn't he do it then? Well, this goes into the whole debate of whether you think Sukuna only wanted to kill Gojo in their fight and didn't care about getting this ability or getting stronger. I'm of the belief he wanted more from this fight instead of just killing him. That's not to say he wasn't trying. I just think he had other intentions than specifically just going for the kill. But like I said, I'm pretty sure Sukuna knows the level of strength Gojo's at, so him even trying to kill him in moments like apparently cutting his neck or whatever, I'm pretty sure he knows that's not gonna kill Gojo. There also could be a second interpretation that Furnace was sealed from the beginning and Sukuna couldn't use this since his first domain clash. Sukuna was using a binding vow to alter his effective range, and in this chapter it said that altering his effective range constantly with binding vows meant that the furnace remained cooled and sealed. The only problem is that I'm not sure if Sukuna used the binding vow here. Like, I'm not sure. I know it's not explicitly stated every time someone uses a binding vow, but some people assumed he did since his range was so small and barely reaching the street. In Shibuya, it said he created a binding vow to increase the range to 140 meters, and therefore allowing an escape route. Sukuna's domain is barrierless to begin with. Decreasing his range could serve to strengthen his output against Gojo's domain barrier, but Sukuna did that in their third domain clash, since in that moment Gojo strengthened his barrier. Sukuna wouldn't need to do that in the beginning since Gojo didn't make any adjustments to his barrier. Domains are genuinely weak and could be destroyed from the outside, so Sukuna using a binding vow to decrease his range in that moment would be kinda odd.
Sukuna, with his regular effective range he has when he opens his domain, should be enough to destroy Gojo's domain from the outside.
Am I tripping or am I wrong? Like, you guys let me know. But hey, from the looks of it, it looks like Sukuna's domain's range got smaller, and obviously to alter his domain range, he's using binding vows. So if you look at it like that, you could probably say he used the binding vow from the first clash, but I just don't know if he necessarily has to do that. Like, I can understand if you guys think he did, because it kind of makes sense, but I just don't know if he had to do that. Also, I want to touch upon that explanation again. I don't really know if it makes sense saying he didn't have the freedom to use it because he kept altering his domain with binding vows, because Sukuna essentially only opted into destroying Gojo's domain from the outside,
and he didn't necessarily have to keep doing that. And I say keep because the first one was probably the only one where he had to destroy it from the outside, because after that Gojo flipped his interior and his exterior conditions, making the inside weaker.
We learned in their domain clashes that Sukuna had Megami shoulder the burden of Maharaga's adaptation to Unlimited Void. We find out that Sukuna's sure hit effect targets everyone in the domain except himself, so the sure hit targeting Sukuna was still in place, since he didn't have his own sure hit protecting him to cancel out Unlimited Void. So the whole time in those 5 clashes, Unlimited Void was hitting Megami Soul and Maharaga was adapting to it. Hence why Gojo was surprised when Maharaga adapted after the only time the brute front force of Unlimited Void hit Sukuna directly. I'm pretty sure Sukuna wanted Maharaga to adapt to Unlimited Void, so that's why Sukuna opted into more riskier options into destroying Gojo's domain from the outside, since it was harder to do and would probably give Maharaga more time to adapt. Gojo comments on Sukuna taking the riskier option even after he changed the conditions of his domain, making it weaker on the inside, meaning it could have been way more efficient to destroy it from the inside. Gojo also comments on him not using any other curse technique than the one granted to his domain, while we see Sukuna smirking and Maharaga wheels spin. keeping this on the down low from Gojo to surprise him like he did when Maharaga adapted to Unlimited Void. And like I said earlier, Maharaga was adapting to Unlimited Void the whole time, which was Sukuna's plan. So in this example where he expanded his domain's power and effective range to destroy Gojo's domain from the outside after Gojo switched the internal and external factors, it wasn't necessarily the route he needed to take in order to destroy the domain. And like I said earlier, Sukuna only opted into destroying Gojo's domain from the outside, when he could have actually destroyed it from the inside, apparently. Meaning that some of these binding vows could have been avoided. Meaning he could have possibly not sealed the furnace ability by altering his effective range so much. But in the specific domain clash that we're talking about, furnace wouldn't even do anything by this point since Gojo already knew how to replenish his burnt out curse technique. But regardless, there's a possibility of Sukuna being able to use it. Lastly, I want to ask you guys a question. It's made pretty clear that the furnace or divine flame or whatever you call it is what Arame was referring to, and probably Gojo when he said Sukuna couldn't give him his all, since this was called his ultimate attack. If this ability isn't a factor, why did Gojo question whether he could have beaten Sukuna who didn't have the 10 shadows? This would mean that if Sukuna went into their fight without it and not having the one conic slash, I think narratively this ability should play a factor for Sukuna in their battle, but there's some people who say Gojo was just saying he couldn't give me his all since this affinity wouldn't let Sukuna use furnace. For one, I always found this interpretation strange for the fact that Gojo feels bad about not letting Sukuna give his all, and it's because of himself, because he's so strong. Like, it feels kind of weird. It's funny how people are saying in this chapter that Sukuna couldn't give his all because Gojo forced him not to, due to him changing his domain conditions, forcing Sukuna to use a bunch of binding vows to change up his effective range to counter Gojo. Well, how come you don't keep the same energy? Well, Gojo apparently also forced him to not be able to use furnace due to infinity. So what you're telling me is that Gojo is so strong that he didn't let Sukuna get out furnace because he forced him into making a bunch of binding vows to break his domain? And even if he didn't do that, Gojo's affinity can't get bypassed by furnace too? So wait. Sukuna can never really use furnace because Gojo is just too strong? So what Gojo is really saying is that, damn, if I didn't change those conditions and I didn't keep on my affinity, Sukuna would have been able to go all out. I don't know, man. That doesn't sound like a person that's genuine. I don't think Gojo's of the mindset of trying to give someone props by indirectly hyping himself up. Regardless, for the people who have this interpretation, I always ask this question, and it doesn't seem to get an answer. Now I'm asking you guys, the viewers, why did Gojo say he doesn't know if he could beat a higher Nara Sukuna, or a Sukuna without the 10 shadows? Some tell me it's because he's just glazing and coping. So yeah, that's a question for me to you guys, because I generally don't know, and I want to know what you guys come up with. But that's it, guys. Leave a like, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.